Good evening and welcome to the second installment in our Cornelia Goethe Colloquien, Never Too Old to Be Seen, Aging and Gender in European Cinema. I want to start by apologizing for presenting what tonight will be an all-male panel. Particularly since we learned this week that we are going to have an incoming government in the state of Hesse which wants to try and outlaw gender-neutral language. Yeah, I think let them try. This is tonight's offering is a middle-aged guy introducing a younger guy talking about very old guys in cinema in a critical masculinity perspective, so we're halfway safe, I guess, if we take the critical sufficiently seriously. My name is Vinzenz, and I'm a professor of cinema studies here at Goethe University, and it's one of my current privileges in academia to direct the HC project, which is a Volkswagen project, which will run for 4 years. We're about 6-7 months in. And tonight's speaker, Luis Freijo, is one of the researchers in our project. He works with the London unit, but he covers a lot of territory because he's originally from Spain, and in the HC project works on Spanish cinema and television, as well as British cinema and television. In HC, we selected all the postdocs based on their previous industry experience. So we have a group of academics. You met Asia 2 weeks ago. She's also one of those people who have a background in cinema studies, but also a background in the industry. Asia was a festival curator at the Sarajevo Film Festival. He was in charge of the Sarajevo Talents Program before embarking on a PhD, and she's currently also working as a member of the selection committee of the Forum of the Berlinale, the Forum section of the Berlinale. And Luis simply has a background in television production mostly. He earned his first degree in communication from the Complutense, Rey Juan Carlos University in Madrid in 2016. And then worked in television production, and one of the advantages of having people who work in the television sector is that they have a lot of gossip to share about celebrities, and I hope we're going to get some of that tonight. I mean, we've had it in meetings, so we shouldn't hold back here. And he then went on to earn a PhD with a study on global genres, which is coming out as a book hopefully right soon, next year or the year after that. And he is now a postdoc researcher in HC. And he's working at King's College in London. Started tonight is, as you see, projected already, Man in Search for Meaning, Masculinity and Aging in a Transnational European Context. And with that, I hand the microphone and the podium over to you. Thanks, Luis.
Thank you, Vinzenz, for the presentation, and thank you as well to the Cornelia Goethe Center for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. This is a great opportunity for us to start working on the issues of the project. So as has been mentioned, my name is Dr. Luis Freijo, and this evening I represent HC, Aging and Gender in European Cinema, the project as part of its postdoctoral team. Vinzenz and Dr. Asia Makarevich in the previous lecture in the series, in the inaugural lecture of the series, already introduced the project, but just in case anyone here was not present, we are a research project funded by the Volkswagen Stiftung with research units in the Université here, at Paris 3 Sorbonne Nouvelle, at Università degli Studi Uniti in Italy, at King's College London, and at Babes Bolyai University at Cluj-Napoca, Romania. Specifically, I work at the King's College unit with Dr. Belen Vidal as the principal investigator. And we have a brand new website, which is here on the slide. It's a very short and sweet URL that you can check out if you're interested in the activities that we are doing. This a lot of stuff there, also in terms of outreach and blog posts and our events, etc. So if you want to
They
take a look at
have
that.
great interactive features.
Yes.
You can do quizzes and stuff.
And it's very aesthetically pleasing, very, very beautiful. So, as was announced in the title and abstract of today's lecture, what I aim to do today is to problematize how aging masculinity is constructed in contemporary European cinema. HC has an explicit remit in which the study of aging is inextricable from that of gender. And the purpose of this lecture is to rehearse a working definition of aging and masculinity to try and understand the changes associated with maleness and older age and how they are represented in European films. The decade of the 2010s and the early 2020s is interesting in this sense because it has witnessed the release of a variety of high-profile films that feature male protagonists over 60 who are struggling with the approach to the third age. Specifically, I will be focusing on 3 films from 3 European countries. The first of them is Dolor y Gloria by Pedro Almodóvar, which I believe you have seen right before coming here. He's from Spain. The second one is La Grande Bellezza by Paolo Sorrentino, which is an Italian film. And the third one is The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry by Hetty MacDonald, which is a very recent British production. Actually, I think in Germany it released in September this year. It was announced in the abstract that it was going to be 4 films. I was going to talk about a 4th German film, Western by Valeska Greiseback, but I realized that if I had 4 case studies, I would be talking here until tomorrow morning, and it would be better to keep it on time. So, 3 films. The ultimate objective of the lecture is to chart the similarities and differences among these aging male characters in order to ascertain the intersection with other political ideas such as class, race, gender values, national constructions, and European political dynamics. And before starting to define the main critical framework of today's lecture, what I would like is to introduce a note on methodology. The project is at the moment in its 9th month of life. It started in February. So this is the moment in which we are starting to explore methodologies and critical frameworks for the analysis of films. Today's lecture rehearses methodologies of film aesthetics and close-text analysis through cultural gerontology with a cross-European comparative analysis, comparative width, if you like. So I will be looking not only at how aging and gender are expressed from the perspective of narrative and theme, but also how film language articulates the issues of aging and gender in each of the films. And we'll be looking at film form. It is also worth noting that due to how early we are in the project, writing this has been a learning process for me as well, so we will all be learning together this evening. Let's start then by defining the critical 3 key concepts that I want to use in this lecture to analyze the films. And they are going to be aging, masculinity, and the search for meaningless, as announced in the title really. First, aging has become a consensus term to indicate the process of entering and navigating old age. Despite being a concept that is widely used, its definition is often taken for granted in the literature and it's not really explored. And it is a complex one that requires a bit of attention. Specifically, Kate de Medeiros finds that there are 3 aspects to a definition of aging, a complete definition of aging. First, there is a chronological aging. Secondly, there is a biological aging. And third, there is a functional aging. There is then the first aspect, chronological aging. The World Health Organization provides a chronological definition that has been helpful to us to start with the first stages of the project. According to the World Health Organization, aging starts in some period between 55 years of age and 65 years of age. The definition of the age depends basically on when the retirement age in each country starts and the measurements on life expectancy. There is furthermore a biological definition of aging, the process by which the cells that compose our body replicates starts decelerating at some point. According to Leonard Hayflick, who has studied this loss of molecular fidelity increases the risk of pathology until one way or another we die. Our bodies bear some of the external markers of this deceleration: wrinkles, loss of mobility, graying hair, increase or decrease of body mass, sagging of certain areas. However, there is no agreed point on when one becomes old from a biological perspective. Actually, according to Hayflick, the moment in which this deceleration starts is when we reach sexual maturity at puberty. So we are all aging right now. Aging then becomes, according to Kate de Medeiros, the way that others react to and make sense of that loss of molecular fidelity that is the hallmark of aging. So from this definition we can infer the third aspect of aging, that is functional aging. Functional aging indicates how aging is conceived, understood and perceived by others. Functional aging has to do with how each individual navigates both chronological and biological aging, but also with how the aging person can function in the context of a production-oriented capitalist world. So in order to summarize this idea of aging, what is important to focus now is on the fact that, as Michael Kimmel puts it, aging is a process, it's not a state of being, and is therefore socially constructed. And the second concept that informs this lecture is also understood as socially constructed. It is useful to go to definitions of gender as a socially constructed concept to understand masculinity. As K.M. Firke puts it, quote, "Gender discourse provides a system of meanings and a way of thinking that shapes how men and women experience, understand and represent themselves, which also shapes how many other aspects of human life and culture." This discourse, according to Firke, is based on hierarchical difference, and therefore it has to do with the distribution and allocation of power. That is the result of any hierarchy. Furthermore, returning to the seminal definition of gender as constructed proposed by Judith Butler in Gender Trouble, quote, "Gender is an identity tenuously constituted in time, instituted in an exterior space through a stylized repetition of acts. We constitute gender by acting on an exterior in different ways." And the conjunction of all of these acts is what is the gender identity that we create. Crucially, these acts take place on the surface of the body, and this is important for today because embodiment is an important part of how aging is understood in these films. So according to these notions of gender, then we can propose a working definition of masculinity for the purposes of today's lecture. Masculinity would be conformed by a stylized repetition of acts that establishes a discourse on how to be a man, which is instituted in hierarchical difference against a discourse on how to be a woman, but also against how other masculinities are formed in different males. And finally, in order to establish a common thread throughout the three films, the third theoretical point of this lecture, that is the search for meaning, is going to stray away from gerontological discourse and from gender discourse in order to reach psychotherapy. Specifically, the method of logotherapy designed by Viennese psychiatrist Viktor Frankl will be used as the third critical framework for today. Frankl, who was a survivor of the concentration camps in World War II, founded what he called the Third Viennese School of Psychoanalysis and devised this method of logotherapy. Frankl opposed Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler in their explanations of what the core motivations for human existence were. Freud proposed a pleasure principle, we are driven by the will to pleasure, and Alfred Adler proposed that we are driven through the will to power. As opposed to them, Frankl conceived his approach centered around the meaning of human existence as well as man's search for that meaning. This is written in 1959, so he's using the term man as a gender neutral, which shouldn't be, but understand person or human. According to logotherapy, this striving to find a meaning in one's life is the primary motivational force in humans. Frankl declares that, quote, "This meaning is unique and specific to each person in that it must and can be fulfilled by them alone. By setting a patient on a personal quest for meaning, the search for their own specific meaning. Logotherapy is based on a certain degree of tension, the tension between what one has already achieved and what one still ought to achieve. This tension is useful because it echoes the idea of aging as process and masculinity as process, in that the search for meaning is a process that changes over time and does not become a fixed state of being. Frankl calls this tension noodynamics, and he defines it as the existential dynamics in a polar field of tension where one pole is represented by a meaning that is to be fulfilled and the other pole by the person who has to fulfill it. It is beyond the purposes of this lecture and beyond my capabilities of criticize logotherapy as a psychotherapy method, as a clinical kind of therapy. What matters today is to track these three intersectional processes, that is the search for meaning, aging and masculinity, in order to compare how they take place in these three European films and in order to evaluate how European cinemas tackle the question of aging and identity. Since you have only been able to watch one of the films for today's lecture, the other two films you haven't, I will just do a brief introduction to the synopsis of each of the three films. I understand that the Pain and Glory screening had to be stopped short. Is that correct? You want to know how it ends?
Spoil it for us.
No such thing as spoilers in film studies, I'm afraid. Basically, at some point, he comes to terms with the memories of the death of his mother and with the memories of his erotic awakening as a child, seeing the construction worker that is fixing his house with his mother. And that leads him to go to the doctor to, first of all, get unhooked from heroin, and second of all, have certain corrective healthcare processes to help with the back pain and to help with the choking. And all of that enables him to physically engage with the making of another film. So the final shot of the film is one shot in which we realize that the flashbacks that we've been seeing are actually a new film that he's making about the memory of his childhood. We will see an image of that final shot. That, as for Pain and Glory, which had to do with this Spanish filmmaker Salvador Mayo, who in his old age, due to physical ailments, is not able to make films anymore. The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, as we were saying before, is a British film directed by Hetty MacDonald, which features a couple of middle-class pensioners, Harold Fry and his wife Maureen, who are played respectively by Jim Broadbent and Penelope Wilton. One morning, Harold receives a letter from a former co-worker and friend, Queenie Hennessy, letting him know that she is afflicted with terminal cancer and she is in a hospice waiting to die. Harold then, on an impulsive decision, decides to cross England walking to visit Queenie, under the belief that as long as he walks, Queenie will live. Harold encounters a series of characters in his journey, which becomes a media phenomenon and transforms into a festive pilgrimage joined by many different people. However, Harold's walking journey becomes also a memory journey towards a traumatic event in his past, which is the death of his son David, and the subsequent strain in his marriage with Maureen. And finally, La Grande Bellezza, or Great Beauty, directed by Paolo Sorrentino, starts in the 65th birthday of protagonist Jeb Gambardella, who is played by Tony Servillo, and who is a celebrity journalist of Italy. Jeb wrote an acclaimed novel in his youth, but has never published another one, and the arrival of his birthday and the news that a lover from his youth, his first love, has died, made Jeb reflect on the life that he leads, joining parties of the Roman high class and writing for a cultural magazine and not doing much creative or much in general. Jeb's journey through Rome in the film is punctuated by several encounters. The encounter, for example, with Ramona, who is a stripper in her 40s who is ill and who passes away throughout the film due to her illness, which is never specified. There's also the encounter with the death of the young son of an acquaintance of his due to mental health issues. And also there's a very meaningful encounter with a 100-year-old nun who comes to visit Rome. These experiences eventually lead Jeb to finish that search of meaning by writing a new novel, which, much like Salvador, shoots a new film. So the analysis of these three films will be structured in three parts that deal with three different themes. The concepts go from narrower to wider. In the first part, we will be talking about embodiment, how old age is reflected on the surface of the body of each of these characters. The second part will deal with how these bodies interact with the space around them. And the third part, which I've called the meaning of meaning, will be a critical idea of what this search for meaning means, and this is where I will get more political. So the first of these concentric circles is the body. As has been explained before, the identity turn in gender studies, spearheaded by Butler, had the body as its center, with the assertion that the stylized repetition of acts that conform gender take place on the surface of the body. According to, for instance, Thomas Gershik, the body acquires a dual nature, in which on the one hand it has a material and biological reality, but on the other hand it also carries social meaning, and these two aspects are folded into each other, they coexist together. Gershik also considers that bodies are a type of social currency that has to do with normativity, and therefore having a less normative body within a certain social environment entails a risk of marginalization. In the context of an ageist society, to use the classic term by Robert Butler, ageism means the systematic marginalization of someone for the sake of being old. So in the context of this ageist society, the aging body becomes a locus of potential marginalization, hence the importance of starting analysis by looking at these aging male bodies. The importance of the body is very, very explicit in Pain and Glory, for instance. The first shot of the film features his protagonist Salvador submerged in a pool with his aging body on display under the water. And very soon after, a montage sequence of with Salvador's voiceover elaborates a list of the different ailments that afflict Salvador with different graphics. It's a very strange sequence within a quite realistic film. According to this montage sequence, the source of Salvador's knowledge about his aging body is pain and illness, and then the connection between being old or being aging and being infirm is made as subsequent and as necessary. Antonio Banderas' performance makes the consequences of this pain felt on screen, especially in relation to the back pain and the Forestier syndrome, and wherever he has to move around his home or getting in a taxi, we can see how he goes slowly. He goes out of the taxi holding, whenever he needs to kneel, he has to put a cushion. This is something that Banderas' performance made very, very visible. This depiction of the aging body is at the crux of Salvador's struggle to find meaning in old age and to find a workable way of masculinity. The two aspects of a gender body deconstruction mentioned here coalesce, that idea of the body as material and the body as social. On the one hand, the materiality of Salvador's ill body, which has reached the point of disability in his early old age due to the limited movement that the pain allows, prevents him from making films. It is useful to deploy here the concept from cultural gerontology of functional abilities, defined by Kate Medeiros as a broad description to capture physical, cognitive, and emotional changes that occur in later life. Salvador's functional abilities are defined by pain, and this is where the search of meaning, as according to Viktor Frankl, starts. How to find meaning without the act of shooting film, which is so central to his identity. On the other hand, however, the social meanings attached to that aging body have to do with a sense of productivity in a capitalist context. Salvador's productivity, his role within that productive society, is the creation of film that then can be sold, screened, etc. And his struggle to understand the meaning of his life and himself are partly, not entirely, but partly derived from the meaninglessness of leading an unproductive life in a compulsory productive context. Ultimately, the improvement of his functional abilities through different medical treatments leads the body to sustain again the hardships of shooting a film and reopen a path for meaning, and we will come back to the deeper meanings of this later on. The body of Jeb Gambardella in The Great Beauty is also one of the subjects of focus in that film, but because of opposite reasons. Jeb is initially presented as an example of successful aging. Successful aging is one of the most notable and also one of the most problematic concepts in cultural gerontology. And Rowe and Kahn define it as having three characteristics. The first one is low risk of disease or disease-related disability, or the absence of disease and risk factors of disease. The The second is high mental and physical function, which means the ability to participate fully in all the activities of daily living. And the third is an active engagement with life. This is problematic. It has been signaled as problematic by many authors because it places unrealistic expectations on aging people. People do not have the choice to be disease-free, for example. And having to conform to this idea of successful aging places some constraints that are unfair. So in The Great Beauty, Jeb has just turned 65. He's a celebrity journalist who keeps a lean body and an active sexual and social life. In the film, this is also slightly problematic because the actor, Tony Servillo, was 54 at the time of making the film, but he plays a 65-year-old character. So of course, his body doesn't look like a 65-year-old, it looks better than that because he was 10 years younger. As opposed to Salvador, he's first presented at the peak of his birthday party, dancing and kissing several of the younger women invited. That's the image on top there. In this first shot, Jeb is framed in the center, aestheticized through framing and the slow motion of the image, and with the rest of his friends around him. They are kind of constituting the court, and he is the king. He calls himself king of the mundane. However, Jeb's successful aging is later shown to be a mask of aging. This is another concept from cultural gerontology, and Emmanuel Toul explains it as aging social actors' attempt to salvage their reputation, that is their cultural worth, in the face of the negative social constructions associated with decline, so hiding these external physical markers of aging. Part of Jeb's definition of his hegemonic masculinity is located on the surface of his body, and so Jeb's efforts to mask the marks of aging are made visible throughout the film. So, for instance, Jeb is shown to be wearing a girdle to look like his body is thinner, and there's an image there towards the end of the film. He visits a plastic surgeon specialized in Botox injections, and he carefully combines suits in different colors and formats in order to conform his presence and to code his masculinity as an embodiment of the visual elegance expected of his creative/high class in Italy. But Jeb's bodily masculinity is especially put into question through his increasingly detached attitude towards active sex throughout the film. At the beginning of the film, he has a meaningless one-night stand with a woman named Norieta, and after that, Jeb is not shown engaging in any more penetrative sex. The film's main female character, Ramona, the ill stripper that I was mentioning before, does not engage with Jeb in intercourse, despite them having a pretty close relationship. And in fact, in Ramona's last scene in the film, Jeb and her are shown to have slept together, so to have slept in the same bed, but not to have sex. He says it was nice not to make love, and she says it was nice being nice to each other. This reflects some of the research that is going on currently in cultural gerontology in relation to sexual practices with aging people. Lynn Sandberg, for example, explains how sociological research on sexual practices in old age indicates how there is a shift from practices such as penetrative sex, which might not be possible under certain functional abilities, towards more sensual ways of touching and cuddling that become much more fulfilling at a certain point in time. So Jeb also engages in these more sensual practices and finds a much more meaningful redefinition of his early old age in his approach to sex, to find a much more fulfilling encounter with Ramona than just traditional intercourse practices. So Jeb's functional ability did not preclude him from engaging in the labor of writing a novel. He is not like Salvador. He is not impeded in his search for meaning by his body. It is precisely when his articulation of hegemonic masculinity is destabilized through this detachment of sexes and through making visible the masks of aging that he is able to undertake again the search for meaning and undertake again the labor of writing a novel. And finally, in The Unlikely Pilgrims of Harold Fry, the search for meaning starts as a way to deal with grief. As such, Harold's walk forwards towards screening is inversely parallel to a walk backwards in memory, where Harold travels to the point in time in which his son David died and he could do nothing about it. What is significant about Harold Fry is that this process in memory is rooted in the body and in Harold's functional abilities. We're going to see a clip now from the film in which the physical exertion of the walk prompts a breakthrough in memory from Harold. At this point in the film, Harold, this is 15-20 minutes in, and Harold has just started his walk. He doesn't really have the physical form yet to do it. He doesn't have proper gear. He wears shoes that are really not good for walking. And he struggles. That's what we're going to see now. So the clip exemplifies some of the aesthetic choices of the film. The light is very saturated and white, without much contrast, which on the one hand is a naturalistic way of reflecting how the light of England is. When it's always cloudy, the light is very soft, it doesn't have much contrast. But on the other hand, this serves to make Harold's surrounding plain, dull, in order to focus on his body. There is an intense focus on close-ups of Harold's body. We have his face struggling, we have the feet hurt, we have the hands, we have the sound of the breath and of his feet as he walks. And there is a very shallow depth of field. Depth of field is a property of the image that measures how much of the image is on focus. So if it's shallow depth of field, we only see the foreground and then the background is blurred. If it's deep depth of field, we see everything on focus. Harold is detached from the context and the surroundings. We just focus on his body. So instead of convening a community version of what England is, contemporary England is, the film focuses on an introspective memory process endured by the aging male protagonist, which occurs through the body, which occurs through physical exertion. Harold and Maureen, his wife, have spent 25 years of stasis after the death of David without moving, and with a frozen grief that has not evolved into transformative mourning. It is at the moment in which Harold puts his body in movement, as portrayed in the film, that memory and grief start working together towards mourning. Grief is what we feel when we experience loss. Mourning is how we express it socially. Harold points in this way to a process of aging in which mind and body are part of a continuum, and in which bodily functional abilities, such as the ability to walk 500 miles, are necessary to unlock transformative evolution of mourning. Having analyzed how masculinity is constructed through the body in the 4 films, we can also move on to the second concentric circle and discuss space. Bodies do not exist in a vacuum, but rather relate to the space surrounding them, which is both physical and social. So in Pain and Glory, the construction of a space, just like the construction of the body, is determined by Salvador's ailments, illnesses, and ultimately reduced functional abilities to move. It is significant that Madrid is mentioned repeatedly in the film as something that is necessary for Salvador's creative process, but we don't really see Madrid. The only scene that takes place outside in the public space of Madrid is this one, in which he goes to buy drugs, and he goes to a working class neighborhood where he witnesses a fight with knives. So Madrid is presented as this space which is dangerous, as opposed to the home, which is nurturing and safe. Usually, whenever he is at home, the camera is very gentle, moves toward the space, setting it, and then at some point it just settles down when a conversation is going on. And what we see is 2 people framed together and talking. We have some examples there from Alberto and from Mercedes, Salvador's assistant. So it is a place of physical stasis because it's determined and navigated by Salvador's aging functional abilities, and in this sense it mirrors the professional stasis of Salvador, who cannot make films. However, the fact that it's a place of physical stasis, it makes a place for memory construction. Memory construction that takes place through the use of heroin, which is something quite ambiguous in the film. On the one hand, we know that Salvador has had trouble with his former love partner and with Alberto because they were addicted to heroin at some point, and he was opposed against it. But at some point, the fact that the scenes, whenever he takes heroin, a breakthrough in memory happens, have an ambiguous look towards, Salvador needs the heroin in order to make the film, to make his memory work towards making a film. Traversing space is also an important part of the Great Beauty, an important part of Jeff Gambardella's search for meaning, but its articulation is the opposite to Pain and Glory. While Madrid remained in the background to favor the status of Salvador's flat, in the Great Beauty, space is mostly defined by Jeff's movements through Rome. And these are the movements of the flaneur. The flaneur is a walker that wanders aimlessly through an urban space. There is an ambiguous aspect to how Jepp is a flaneur. On the one hand, through his wanderings, Jepp rejects in his process of aging a productive idea of time, but on the other hand, he has the economic privilege to be able to reject a productive idea of time. We are going to see another clip that illustrates how Jepp's relation with the space of Rome is. He has just attended a high-class party organized by an art collector with Ramona, and he finds a man called Stefano, and Stefano has the keys to the most beautiful private palaces of Rome, so they do a nighttime private tour. The clip is significant for two reasons for the purpose of today's talk. The first one is that it constitutes an example of how the film constructs through aesthetics the subjectivity of Jepp. The film engages with what Rosalind Galt and Carl Schoonover called an overt engagement with aesthetics, meaning it has a very flashy camera that moves around and circles the space, then is punctuated by this classical music, by editing. This is one of the characteristics of art house cinema, and indeed the film makes its credentials as an art house film through this, and also the credentials of the filmmaker as an auteur of Paolo Sorrentino. But it also represents the way that Jepp sees, that Jepp experiences the space. We are seeing Rome through the eyes of Jepp. The film codes this engagement with the aesthetic as beauty. Beauty is this way of camera moving, these angles, this music. And Jepp is someone that is attuned to it, that is able to perceive it. So most of the film just presents the conflict between Jepp's capability of perceiving beauty and Jepp's capability of producing beauty. If you remember, the search for meaning is the difference between one is and one ought to be. But the second reason of why this clip is important is because it's indicative of how Jepp's aging masculinity engages with space. Jepp is shown as someone that enjoys the privilege of being able to traverse both public and private spaces of Rome. Privilege in the sense of being able to walk, having the functional capabilities of being able-bodied enough to walk through these spaces, which, for example, Salvador couldn't do. But also privilege because he has the symbolic capital, using the term of Bourdieu, to be invited into these places with art suffused with beauty, but with art which are also suffused with the meaning of aristocracy. Beauty is much easier to identify and turn into a novel if you are given a private tour through a palace full of marbles than if you are in the middle of Rome with a mass of tourists around you. And in the unlikely pilgrimage of Harold Fry, the space is gendered. Harold Fry enacts a strict separation of public and private space according to gender. The space of Harold's aging masculinity is public, to the point of becoming a media celebrity and part of media discourse after he has a conversation with a journalist, while the space of Maureen's aging femininity remains the home. This is the only film that has these contracts because Harold is the only married character here. Harold's scenes walking are often framed through tracking shots that follow his movements or through dynamic editing, and there is this sense of movement, of advancing. In contrast to them, the shots of Maureen waiting for him at home become static, just a frame, and the composition is decentered, as if indicating that Maureen is incomplete while Harold is absent. Caroline Holland points out the importance of the use of public space by aging populations, arguing that such behaviors have consequences for older people in terms of feeling and being safe in public spaces, and at the same time feeling and being visible and included. In Harold Fry, Maureen is not visible and is not included, and this means that the process of mourning endured by Harold through the engagement with the space and through bodily exertion is not open to Maureen. And this is something that she resists and resents, and she refuses to join Harold's pilgrimage. So, going to the final part, embodiment and space interlock with memory and channel the search for meaning undertaken by these aging masculine characters. Frankl finds that meaning is specific to each person. So in his practice of logotherapy, he finds that there are 3 paths for attaining it. The first part is creating a work or a deed. The second part is experiencing something or encountering someone. And the third path is the attitude that we take towards unavoidable suffering. These 3 paths appear in the 3 case studies discussed here. So both Salvador and Jeb undertake the creation of an artistic work to make sense of their aging masculinities. And Harold Fry also attempts a deed with his determination to walk to save Queenie's life. This ultimately leads into a pathway to reflect on the consequences of the death of his son. Furthermore, the protagonists in the 3 films structure their journeys through encounters that prompt new stages in the search. If you remember, Salvador advances towards the resolution of his pain by encountering Alberto, by encountering his former lover Federico, by encountering the memories of the death of his mother, and eventually that leads him to the doctor. The encounter with Queenie is what drives Harold forward. He wants to see her after 25 years, but he also has encounters with other people of rural England. And Jeb also has the encounter with Ramona, the encounter with the nun. This is all important for the search for meaning. And the changes in attitude towards unavoidable suffering are especially important in Pain and Glory, as Salvador seeks medical help to overcome his ailments, and in The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, as Harold comes to terms with his responsibility in his son's death and the failure of his marriage. However, this concept of meaning should not be taken uncritically, should not be taken at face value, and it is worth asking what is the meaning of meaning in each of the films. So, for example, the politics of care are instrumental for Salvador's resolution of his search for meaning. The film's aesthetic and narrative choices focus on the introspective search of Salvador in order to shoot films again, but that search is supported by caregivers. Salvador's functional abilities in day-to-day life are supported by his housemaid and his assistant and factotum, Mercedes. They are both female characters of whom we don't really know much. The film is not particularly interested with them. And the fact that the carers are both women is not coincidental. According to Kate de Medeiros, most care is provided by women, even when that care is paid care, usually at lowly wages. And furthermore, because women have a longer life expectancy, that care is usually not reciprocated at the end of their lives. And in addition, the crucial circumstance that gets Salvador back to filming and to resolve his search for meaning is the Spanish healthcare system. It is not said in the film explicitly whether he goes to public or private healthcare, but there is a focus on the diagnosis of his pains, on the scenes that he goes to the doctor. And this highlights the importance of living in a country where functional abilities can be enhanced through proficient healthcare. And this is something that may not be available to someone that lives in a different country. In this sense, there are certain privileges that Salvador enjoys as a Spanish Asian man that inform his notion of meaning and are not necessarily acknowledged throughout the film. In The Great Beauty, the discourse of the film equates meaning with beauty, as we have explained before, and searching for meaning entails searching for beauty. However, it has been argued with the previous clip, Jeb is able to perceive what the film understands as beauty. The film could have finished with Jeb realizing that perceiving beauty is enough, that he has meaning just by being able of seeing the beauty in day-to-day life around him. Instead, the film chooses to finish the search for meaning by making Jeb writing a novel, which is a commodifiable cultural product. Although the film destabilizes up to a degree what successful aging masculinity means by making visible the masculine of aging and by this idea of Jeb withdrawing from sex, meaning is still shown as something that can be accessed by someone who is aging as long as he is male, as long as he belongs to a privileged class, and as long as he has a number of functional abilities available to him. And something similar occurs with the middle-class pensioner situation of Harold Fry. There's a sharp divide between public spaces that are allowed to Harold and the private spaces to which Maureen is confined. And this is echoed by a certain distrust in the media. Harold becomes a media celebrity throughout the film, and he's followed by a huge number of people that celebrates with him. However, at some point, Harold realizes that the festive environment of his pilgrimage doesn't actually match with the mournful way in which he is grieving the death of his son, and at some point he just breaks away from them. So the unlikely pilgrimage of Harold Fry ultimately expresses distrust in the possibilities of a community to find meaning in later life, specifically the English national community. All that Harold can settle for at the end is an acceptance of grief through mourning, but an acceptance that has to be reached by him as an individual aging male rather than as a collective effort, and which is not open to his wife. His wife has to follow him in the parameters that he has set for his mourning. So, to conclude, the comparison between these three films makes visible some aspects of how aging and masculinity are constructed in European films. The idea of the search for meaning as a methodological tool reveals in these three films how aging as process and masculinity as process are embedded in productive capitalism and in the political rationality of neoliberalism up to a degree. The resolutions of these searches, be it through the creation of a commodifiable artistic endeavor or through the accomplishment of a mediatic pilgrimage, are presented as activities reserved for individual aging men who are supported by other characters but eventually rely on their own solicited processes. In the end, they all generate something that can be sold, either a film, a novel, or a media story, and this is quite significant of what aging and masculinity means in this film. These films do not understand aging as a collective process in which the challenges of embodiment, space, and meaning are resolved, or at least thought through, social ideas of common problems, but through individual functional abilities and a certain privilege. Some aspects in the films destabilize this clear-cut view of a neoliberal political rationality. Salvador's queerness and mournful creativity, the erasure of some of the aspects of hegemonic masculinity in Jeb, or the distrust towards a celebratory national discourse in Harold Fry, do create some avenues of dissent for aging masculinities to explore. The selection of films today cannot really enable a conclusion in which this idea of aging masculinity in search of meaning as individualistic and up to a point neoliberal as a trend, because there's just not enough films, but it certainly is an interesting path for the project for HC to explore in future years. What can be concluded today, however, is that a closer look into how aging and gender intersect in European cinema can provide valuable readings about how today's aging society in Europe, with all its complexities, can be understood through film. Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this rich and very cogent presentation, which, among other things, picks up on the discussion that we had last time, which was a critical discussion about the concept of successful aging, which Leonidovich also put up for discussion in our podium and discussed in terms of what it seems to be problematic about it. And I think the three examples and your analysis of the three films sort of illustrate those dynamics once again. Successful aging, a term which perhaps significantly was brought into play in 1997, the year the new Labour government took over in Britain, and certain shifts in public discourse happened. Would resonate, if you go back, would resonate with this kind of approach to aging. And one of the things that we briefly discussed in our last meeting, but I think came to the fore in your presentation very clearly, was that the concept of successful aging implies that as an aging person, male or female, you have, in a way, to prove your worth and take care of yourself. And that is the norm that is being imposed upon you in a society that talks about aging in terms of successful aging. So there's no, what is at stake really is your entitlement to care as an aging person. So what we're looking at here is certainly not a gerontocracy in the sense that old age automatically confers authority and the privilege of being cared for to you. And I think that's also what you were discussing in your conclusion when you pointed to sort of the, broadly speaking, neoliberal context in which these films can be seen. Thank you very much, Luis Freijo.
Thank you.